Hi everyone. In my last presentation, I covered some of the key updates on the rural renewal stream. There are some major changes going to happen in January of 2026 and going forward. So, I covered the details of those changes only, but what I also thought is important is put these changes in perspective of the overall rural renewal stream. So in this particular presentation, what I'll do is I'll take you through the overall and the most latest eligibility criteria for rural renewal stream, and then we will see how these changes fit into those criteria. So this is the screen that you're seeing right now is from my whiteboard where I have highlighted some of the changes that came into the overall rural renewal scheme. So let's now jump into the section where I am also discussing the overall criteria for rural renewal stream. So in this same whiteboard, I have just done a small graphic to show you details and the building blocks of rural renewal stream. So rural renewal stream, if you think, is a scheme where there are various key players. Number one, what is rural renewal scheme? Rural renewal scheme is a scheme where certain communities of Alberta can designate you or the candidate to fill up its own labor shortages. So if a community has a requirement or a need for certain type of labor, certain type of employees, then it can fill up those with this particular stream. So goes without saying, the most important aspect of rural renewal scheme is a rural community. Okay, so if you go through the overall rural renewal scheme criteria, there is a list, a definite list of communities which participate in this scheme. It doesn't mean these are the only rural communities in Alberta, but these are the rural communities which participate in this scheme. There are a lot of rural communities which don't participate. So what is important is if you are interested in rural renewal scheme, you need to make sure that you have a job offer from one of these communities. So this is the list of the overall community. The latest addition to this list was the town of Edson in February of 2025. Apart from this, this is the overall list. So you can pause and take a look, or you can also look at the Rural Renewal Scheme official webpage, where you can also see what is the designation or what is the overall list for the rural community. That is also available. Okay. Now, once you have understood about the designated community, next important thing is you should have a job offer from an employer in that community. The next important player in this particular scheme is your employer. Obviously, you as a candidate are at the center of it, and I will discuss a lot of criteria which relates to candidates, but the next important thing, in my opinion, is your employer. An employer is somebody who will give you a job offer to work in that particular rural community. You could be already working in a rural community, or you have a job offer to work in a rural community. Now, a job offer, to be eligible for a job offer, to be accepted by the Alberta immigration people, it obviously needs to meet certain job offer requirements which are common across all the schemes. The most important thing is that job offer should come from an employer who is working in a designated. Very important. So if you have a job offer to work, say, in Calgary, and then you want to work in a rural community near Calgary, like you want to just stay there and work in that rural community, that will not work. Say, for example, city of Lethbridge. Lethbridge is like around couple of hours from Calgary, couple of hours south from Calgary. So, say for example, you got a job offer to work in Calgary and you are staying in Lethbridge. That will not work. Those kind of things will not work. That is also detailed in this particular section about ineligible applicants. But what I'm trying to say is that your job offer should place you in that community. Your employer should be established in that community, and you should get a full-time job offer. So job offer is very important. So this is an additional criteria imposed on job offer for rural renewal. The next important thing about job offer is that job offer that you get from an employer should now be endorsed by the Economic Development Office of the community, Economic Development Organization of that community, or the EDO. Each job offer that is issued by your employer should be endorsed by your community via their Economic Development Organization. They will give you an endorsement of candidate letter which will have these details. Make sure when you get your endorsement of candidate letter, you have these important criterias or these important contents handled. There has been a change to the community endorsement requirement where your endorsement of candidate letter is now valid only for a period of 1 year. So that was the first important. This was one of the important changes coming from January 2026. Okay, so that is the second important criteria about your rural renewal scheme. So till now you have seen that two external entities, your community and your employer, are very important for your rural renewal scheme nomination. Very important. Now, a community needs to participate, an employer needs to give you an offer to work in that community, and that community should also endorse that job offer. So your employer and community should work together to give you a job offer and an endorsement. So that is very important, and I hope we are clear on this requirement. Next important player in the rural renewal scheme is obviously you. You are the candidate. A candidate should meet a residency requirement. Right? So as a candidate, both at the time of your application is submitted and at the time of your application is assessed, you must intend to reside and work and live in that community. If you are already living and working in that community, great. But if for any reason you are not working or living in that community, you should give a written intention that you will live and work in that. In most of the cases, if you have a job offer, an employer will ask you to start working in that community. So this important requirement is kind of handled on its own. But to be very clear, you should be either already living in that community or intend to live in that community, and that intention has to be very, very specific. Okay. From a candidate point of view, the next important aspect to consider is your occupation. Right now, what the discussion about occupation right now after these recent changes are now driven by your location. Okay. So as a candidate, if you are a candidate, you have three possibilities. You are living outside of Canada. Okay, that's one possibility. Or if you are living in Canada, you are either living in Alberta or you are living outside Alberta. So there are two or three possibilities as a candidate as far your location is concerned. Now, depending on your location, your occupation related requirements would change, right? So let's see. So if at the time of application or at the time of your applications being assessed. If you are living outside Canada, if for example, if you are living outside Canada, then your occupation can be one of the four from 0 to 3. So tier 0 to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You should have your occupation should be one of the tiers 0 to tier 2. But if you are living in Canada, right? If you are living in Canada, then again there are certain nuances to this. So if you are say living in Canada and you are having a work permit, then if you are living in Canada but outside Alberta, you have the same eligibility. Your occupation needs to be one of the 0 to 3 years. However, if you are living in Alberta with a work permit, then you can apply under any of the tiers. So your NOCs would be under any of the tiers. What does the tier means? These are the overall explanation of the tier. So tier 0 is a typical manager or a management occupation kind of a job. Tier 1 usually needs a degree. Tier 2 needs a diploma. Tier 3 needs some kind of a training. And tier 4 is basically anything that needs a high school and training. And tier 5 is no formal education but still training. Okay? So like somebody who's working in landscaping, farms, things like that. So depending on your location. So say for example, if you are living in, again I'll take example of Calgary, and you got a job offer to work in Lethbridge for a tier 4 occupation, you are still eligible. But say the same person is living say in somewhere in Ontario and they got the same job offer to work as a tier 5 occupation in Lethbridge, they will not be eligible for rural renewal scheme. So for rural renewal scheme and all occupations to work, you need to be already in Alberta working on a valid work permit. Right? Again, this we are discussing in point of view of PR. So you already have taken the step of living and working in Alberta, and in that case, all the occupations are open to you. Obviously, there are certain occupations which are not open. There's a list of ineligible occupations in all of the tiers, but you get the point that the overall tier list is huge, and this exception is like less than 20. That is the most. So this is an important update also that came in the recent changes, where a tier-based endorsement model will take place from January of 2026. Okay, so that is a discussion on occupation for your rural renewal. Very important, right? Next, work experience. Work experience is also important depending on your profile, where you have worked earlier or your overall work experience. It's possible for rural renewal to lay down its own work experience requirement. Now, listen, guys. Rural renewal scheme is a non-express entry pathway, right? So here you will see that the pathway itself, in this case, rural renewal scheme, has imposed a lot of requirements. It could be totally different from the other schemes or express entry or anything like that. So if you have if your occupation is one of the 0 to 5, okay, if you are eligible to apply under 0 to 5, any one of NOCs under 0 to 5, then your work experience can be from a different tier group. So say for example, if you applied for management position tier 0, your experience can be from 0 or 1. If you are applying say for tier 1, like a software engineer or things like that, then your experience can be from 0, 1 or 2. So follow this table to understand if your prior experience or your work experience is from a different tier, you could still be eligible to add that experience towards your qualifying experience limit. What is the qualifying experience limit? 12 months of full-time work in an eligible occupation. This can be anywhere in the world. It could be in Alberta, in Canada, or abroad. That doesn't matter, but you should be able to demonstrate by giving your reference letters, experience letters, and things like that. So you should have at least 12 months of experience in an eligible occupation in your current job offer, and then your experience can be from a different tier also, given these limitations. Say, for example, if you are working in tier 4, you are currently working in tier 4, so you can accumulate your experience from previous jobs if they were also under 2, 3, 4, or 5. So it's not required that they have to be under 4. It could be 2, 3, 4, or 5. So Alberta has given a bit of flexibility in this case. If your NOC changes, if your tier changes, your work experience is still counted within these limits. Okay, so very important. Many people change jobs, that changes their NOC, and that's the reason they would have allowed experience to be counted across different tiers. Right? There are certain requirements. It should be a full-time job, which we all know. You can pause the video and read through the requirements. If you have any questions, reach out on the comments. Next, the next important requirements for rural renewal scheme is your CLB or your language skills. Depending on the NOC, your language skill benchmarks would change. So if you are doing from anywhere between 0 to 3, so these first 4 NOCs, first 4 tiers, your CLB is 5. If you are applying for 4 or 5, your language skill could be lower at 4, but 4 is the absolute minimum. Understand that is 4 of each of the skills. So there are 4 skills that are normally tested: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. You should score 4 or 5 depending on your NOC on each of these skills. So not an average 4 or average 5. It should be minimum of 5 in each score, in each of the skills. Okay. Again, as I was saying earlier, Rural Renewal Scheme is a non-express entry pathway. So the requirements for language, work experience, funds, everything will be different, will be unique to this particular stream. Next comes your education requirements. You should provide an ECA. You should have a minimum of high school degree. Okay? And then you should, if you have done your education outside of Canada, you should provide a educational credential assessment or ECA by one of the organizations like WES and things like that. If you have done your education in Canada, then you don't need to give it. But for people, a majority of us who have done their education outside of Canada, ECA is a required document. Okay? This is not very different. If you already have a express entry profile, there is a high chance you already have an ECA. But there is a 100% chance that you have an ECA. So you can use the same ECA for your rural renewal application. Next important aspect, very important aspect, is settlement of funds. Settlement of funds requirement is, what we have seen is that settlement of funds, if you have already created an express entry profile, settlement of funds is an overall requirement in the express entry profile. As rural renewal scheme is not an express entry pathway, it has its own settlement of funds. Okay. Now, how does the settlement of funds changes? You should demonstrate that you have the minimum funds, and that would depend on 2 things. First is size of your family, and then the size of the community. Remember, the rural renewal scheme works for a specific list of community. Right? This is the list of community. depending on the population of these communities, which you can get information from your community when you go for your endorsement letter. So you should meet the fund requirements which is there in the table. Say for example, if you have a family of 3 and you are living in a community which is like 15,000, then you should have $15,000 in your bank to show as the funds that you can access for your settlement. So you should demonstrate that you have the funds that are available to you and to your family members to settle in your designated community. The community who has given you the endorsement letter based on the job offer. If you are not already living in that community, if you are already living in that community, then you don't need to meet this. Right? If you are already living and working in Canada, you don't need to meet these dollar requirements. Only if you are not residing in Canada, or say if you are in Canada but you are not working, okay? Say you are applying from India, then you need to provide this funds proof. You don't need to provide the funds, you need to provide a proof of the funds. But say if you are living, and working in Calgary and you got an offer to work in Lethbridge, you are okay. You do not need to meet these fund requirements. Okay? So you need funds, but these minimum cutoffs don't apply to you. You should still have funds, but yeah, these minimum numbers is not required to be demonstrated for somebody who is already working and living. This part is same as express entry. Express entry also says that if you're already living and working in Canada, you don't need to meet the funds requirement. You obviously need the funds, but you don't need to meet the requirements. But the fund dollar value in your express entry is just based on your family size. Here it is based on your family size and your community size. So very important. So if you say working in India, you got an offer to work in Lethbridge, then make sure you follow the funds requirement for the community, for your community. Okay. So these are the important criteria for rural renewal stream, and what we just discussed is the changes introduced recently, which will take effect from 1st January 2026. Right? So these are very important. I hope you got an understanding of what changed in rural renewal stream. If you have been following this stream for quite some time, you know what has changed. If you are interested in rural renewal scheme, obviously go through this particular presentation and make yourself aware of the most recent changes so that you are not caught off guard. Okay, so have any questions, put it in the comments and I will see you in the next one. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.